Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive to the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Buffalo Bulls, who finished 3-9 last season. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 27th. We have a special guest joining us today. She is a Pittsburgher from Annapolis in Buffalo. She is the college and high school sports enterprise reporter for the Buffalo News, and every once in a while, she may run a 5K. She is Rachel Lenzi. Rachel can be found at Rachel M. Lenzi on X. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Hi, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. I enjoyed watching all those reels going through. I mean, guys went way back with the Khalil Mack footage and the Jarrett Patterson against Kent State running in a semi-empty stadium during COVID. I remember covering that game when he ran for 400 plus yards as well. Yeah,
touchdowns. It was crazy.
It was great. It was great. It was too bad there was no one there to see it in the stadium that day, except me and a couple other media people and some coaches in the opposing team. I don't think Kent State wants to remember that day.
I don't think so either. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What led you into sports journalism and covering the Bulls, and how long you've been doing that?
Let's see. I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, playing sports. Love to write, love to read. And when I was about 12 years old, the light bulb went on, and it was like, hey, I could get paid to make a living writing about sports. So that's when I decided I wanted to be a sports reporter. So I've lived all over the country. I've covered everything from high school football in Texas. Friday Night Lights is real. Covered was a GA writer, general assignment in Fort Collins, Colorado, covering everything from high schools to the Denver Broncos and Colorado State. Then worked in Portland, Maine, where I covered high schools for about 4 or 5 years, then covered the University of Maine hockey team and the Portland Pirates, which were the AHL farm team for the Anaheim Ducks, and then for the Buffalo Sabres. And then I went to the Toledo Blade in Toledo, Ohio in 2012, covered the University of Michigan football program, covered the Detroit Red Wings, covered auto racing, then went to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution when they had their college football website, Land of 10 in SEC country. Covered Michigan for them for 2 years. When that site shut down, it was between covering the NBA in Salt Lake City or covering college sports, college football, college basketball, college hockey in Buffalo. And I wanted to be close to my family in Pittsburgh. And I said, all right, let's go to Buffalo, shuffling off to Buffalo. And that was summer of 2018. So I'm entering my 7th season covering the University of Buffalo football team. Also cover St. Bonaventure, Buffalo, Niagara, and Canisius basketball, and then help out with general assignment as well. So here we are getting ready for another season of University of Buffalo football with a new coach and a pretty new lineup and a new staff as well, too.
So speaking of a new coach, they lose former head coach Maurice Lindquist to Alabama. They in turn hire Pete Lambeau, who was previously the South Carolina special teams coordinator, to lead this team here in 2024. What can you tell us about Coach Lambeau and what he brings to the table for the Bulls?
He has brought in, as the kids would say, a whole different vibe. I'll say this. Pete was introduced in January. You walked into the field house for his introduction. You talked to people around the facility. You talked to people in administration. You could just feel it was like, I think the word I used was relief. It was like, we can try something new. We can try something different. Pete is very personable. He's a Georgetown graduate. So he's a smart guy, Staten Island native, raised by, New York City police officer. His dad worked like 20, 25 years in force. And, you go to Georgetown, you think, oh, he's going to be, in business or finance or pursuing higher education. You want to be a football coach as well, too. So he climbed the ladder. He took over a program at Lehigh, really got them, them to continue a winning trajectory. Became a head coach at Elon, turned around that program, went to Ball State, from 2011 to 2015, made Ball State into a contender, and then went to the P5 level and, went to Maryland as a special teams coordinator. Special teams are his things. If you watch some of the stuff that, that South Carolina did the last couple of years, they were a juggernaut in the SEC when it came to special teams play. So, he was just a, really good support staff, really creative guy, very, very cerebral, very into pop culture, wants to relate to his players as well, too. makes people feel important. And that's a big thing, especially at this level, not just in dealing with the players, dealing with the coaches, you're dealing with the front-facing public. Because if the ecosystem of sports in Buffalo, Bills and Sabres rule the roost. So you got to be front-facing. You got to get out and shake hands and kiss babies to promote the University of Buffalo football program. Or you got to win, or both. So I think that's one thing Pete's going to be very good at as well. Literally his first or second week on the job, he was going out and meeting high school coaches in the area. He was sending his assistants out to meet high school coaches in the area as well. I had a high school coach say to me here, we haven't had a UB coach do that in a while. Show up unannounced and just sit in the office and talk football. So that is one thing that he's really doing. He's really trying to I wouldn't say create a new image, but just kind of, again, like the kids say, create a new vibe around the University of Buffalo. And he really, really believes in accountability, showing up on time, fulfilling your responsibilities. If you're not going to be here, you need to say why. Basic things that kind of have gotten lost generationally. So that's really, really important as well. That is what this program needs. It really needs a shot of accountability, which I think is going to lead to bigger things. It's what they had under Lance Leipold a few years ago, and I think Pete's going to be a really, really important guy, he and his staff, in reinstituting that into the culture and getting people to fall in line and doing it in a professional way.
As it often happens when you get a new head coach, this also means new assistant coordinators. Buffalo is no different in that regard. Coach Parker brings in Dave Patnode, who's previously the analyst at Virginia, to serve as the offensive coordinator. What type of offense or changes can we expect to see?
Well, before we talk scheme, they got to pick a quarterback. They have no proven quarterback on the roster. I know CJ Agbana split time with Cole Snyder last year. Cole Snyder, who transferred out, but he couldn't prove that he could throw the ball. Jack Shields is from Old Dominion transfer. Was told he can wing it. He can wing it, but we haven't seen him in live reps in a while. All I've watched of him is footage. And yeah, he can wing it, but it was also very heavily edited footage. That's the big question before. And even Pete told me this. He said, before we can decide on schemes, before we can do this, we got to evaluate our personnel. And yeah, they've had 3 or 4 months to evaluate it, 5 at this point. So they got to get a quarterback. They've got to evaluate their receivers. They have, I think it's like their top returning receiver, Nick McMillan. He's going to be his 3rd year with the program, missed 5 games last year with a shoulder injury as well. He had 180 yards on 13 catches and a touchdown last year. They're going to just need to see how he does over the long haul. They're also going to have to see how some of their transfers fit in as well. They've got a kid from Columbia. The name escapes me right now, but he was Columbia's leading receiver. He's a transfer. Taji Johnson from Boston College. They have to see these guys over the long haul. Taji's older brother, Najah, played for UB about 10 years ago. I think he's now a scout with the Houston Texans as well. As far as the running backs go as well, they've lost their top 2 running backs from last year, Ron Cook Jr. and Mike Washington, who put together about 1,000 yards as well. Jacques Barksdale showed, again, short term, he can carry the ball well, pounding running back also, but you have to see how these guys stretch themselves out over an entire season. One thing that really helps UB, I think, they're definitely going to have depth at running back this year behind Barksdale. They've got Lamar Sperling, another guy who he was the Ohio Senior of the Year in 2022, came in part of a big recruiting class, got hurt again, didn't really get a chance to play. Mark Anthony Scott as well, Joe Jiggy also. They've got depth at that position. I think they're going to be okay there. And they've got some holes to fill on the offensive line, but they've got a lot of their veterans coming back. Tyler Doty, Dom Polizzi, Isaiah Wright was a big loss going to Maryland. You look at that was kind of the evolution with the landscape as well, too. And they've got some holes they can fill in with transfers as well, too. So really, they've really got to evaluate and see what they're doing. And I kind of joke, I'm like, oh, Pete, you just don't want to tell anybody what your scheme's going to be. But I buy that. You got to look at your personnel. You got to see how they're going to shake out in spring practices as well, too.
So, you talked a little bit about the quarterbacks. They lose last year's starter, Cole Snyder, off to Eastern Michigan. You mentioned CJ Agbana, and he did much more damage with his legs than his arms in 2023. They also returned Gunnar Gray, who redshirted in 2023. And then after spring practice that you mentioned, they brought in Jack Shields from Old Dominion. You know, in the spring, did CJ look like he had improved his passing? Is he like the leader going into fall camp, or is just
the sample size was too small to tell, to be honest. And in the spring game, it was it was between Gunnar Gray, the guy who just transferred, Richie Watts, CJ Agbana, Mike DePillo, and nobody really stood out. It was, granted, again, it was a very small sample size. It was one game as well. They're constantly rotating quarterbacks during practice. So I think we left, those of us who watched that spring game, we left with more questions about the quarterback position than answers. I think I saw that when I saw the Jack Shields a transfer, and I said, okay, there's some help. And I thought also there are some other quarterbacks out there who may also been able to help as well too. But it is, it's gonna be, it's really, really gonna be about who can go and win this. Gunnar Gray, I was told by a couple people, in the program said, he may be a dark horse in this race as well too. He did really, really well at the junior college level, decided to stay on, but another part of me was like, well, how is this going to translate in as well too? So I think that's one of my question areas that I'm even going to write that we're going to face. I'm like, we still have more questions and answers than we do about the quarterback situation right now. And, unless there's some kind of secret deal that's cut that someone said, oh, Jack Shields, you're going to be the starting quarterback, go through the charade. I can't tell you what's going to happen. I can't tell you much about these guys.
And it sounds like Shields certainly at least is going to be at least given an opportunity to win the job in fall camp.
Oh yeah. So. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be a quarterback competition. Definitely will. But at the same time, it's kind of like unlike years past, there's, when 3 years ago, Kyle Van Treese and Matt Myers. Kyle Van Treese was, he was the guy. Cole Snyder, Matt Myers. Cole Snyder, who had come in from Rutgers, and Matt Myers, who never really shaped up to be this. There was a favorite in these. There isn't one this year. That's what makes this so challenging.
So moving over to the running game, you talked about Mike Washington and Ron Cook Jr. and then Barksdale. Barksdale's the senior, but overall the room is a pretty young room. Last year we saw Cook and Washington dominate the running back touches. Do you think we're going to see a two-back system again?
If you have two running backs, you have none. And at some points, it seemed like UV had 4 running backs last year. And I think the constant rotations, I don't think it did well for consistency. And that's what this team also needs to establish, is consistency as well. I mean, if I'm the coach of this team, I just say, everybody's competing for number 1, number 2, number 3. And that's also, again, why you have games like you do August 29th against Lafayette. The kind of, what's the Seinfeld joke? It's the game about nothing, but that's the game where you see, okay, how is this kind of going to work? How's this going to work? How does this guy fit in and whatnot? You kind of get in the lab there, and then you face Missouri the following week. But, it's young. It's unproven. Again, Barksdale has got to prove how he can do this over the course of 12, maybe 13, maybe 14 games as well, too. That is really what these guys are going to do. They not only have to prepare to win these jobs, they've got to prepare for the long haul of the season.
So would you anticipate beginning of the year, a lot of back seeing what we got, and then kind of probably by halfway through, maybe have an idea of what this room really looks like?
I think probably by the Northern Illinois game in mid-September, we're going to have a better idea. You got Lafayette, you've got Missouri, which is no slouch. Then you've got Connecticut. Might be a winnable game, but I think Connecticut's really going to be the litmus test for this team, because then they go right into Northern Illinois as well. So I don't think it's going to be wait till the halfway point of the season, because especially in the MAC, you can't afford to wait that long.
So moving over to the wide receivers, they got hit in a big way with graduation. Darryl Harding Jr., Booby Curry, and Cole Harity, who were 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in team receiving yards, all graduated. Leading receiver Marilyn Johnson goes off to Florida Atlantic, And so the top returners are Nick McMillan and Chance Morrow. Both were freshmen last year and combined for 17 receptions in 2024. You mentioned this a little bit. You talked about, I guess, how they addressed the losses. You mentioned Tajee Johnson, and there was, I think, another receiver you mentioned they brought in.
Yeah, from Columbia as well.
Yeah.
Columbia receiver.
How did
let me correct myself one more time. I said they were going to play UConn. They're playing UMass. It's UMass, Northern Illinois, and then UConn. My mistake. So,
how did the wide receivers look in the spring? I think Nick McMillan, if I remember correctly, had a pretty big spring game.
Nick McMillan looked very, very strong, and after the spring game, Pete Lembo said, "We are counting on him to be the guy." Interesting about Nick McMillan, he went to high school here in Buffalo. Except for his senior year, he went down to Maryland to Wise to play football. That was during the pandemic. They had different regulations, and came back, and he was even going to be a starter last year as well too. I know Maurice Linguist was really, really impressed by the work he put in the effort he put in as well too. So and there's a lot of that as well. But again, you got to figure out how are these guys like Tajee Johnson and the younger players coming in, how are they also going to fit again? I think Tajee is going to be a very, very good addition as far as, from a leadership standpoint goes as well. He was at Boston College as well. I think that's just a really, really strong addition as well. And, the player from Columbia whose name keeps escaping me, JJ Jenkins. I wanted to call him JJ Johnson. JJ Jenkins. It finally came to me. He was Columbia's leading receiver last year. There's someone, he has the experience. He has proven that he can do this over the course of an entire season, as opposed to just 2 or 3 games. And that goes for the consistency as well. And so when you figure a guy from Columbia, got to be smart, got to be organized, got to have things together as well, too.
So do you think those 3, Jenkins, Johnson, and McMillan, are probably the 3 starters, or?
I don't know. Honestly, I am not. I don't want to project that far as well, because last year I thought Nick McMillan was going to be a starter, and he came off the bench.
You were the only one.
I was wrong. I was like, I'm not afraid to say when I'm wrong, but I can see all 3 of those guys in competition for that as well, and they definitely have the edge as far as that goes. So, one of the things that Pete Lembo was telling me that he likes about the spring and getting guys ready. He's like, he was telling me this back in February. He said, one of the things I like about when you get to the spring, says you see these guys, they may have a slow start. You might not think that they're going to be into this, but all of a sudden the light bulb comes on. They're going to, and he says, and all of a sudden they're in the mix, and you're like, that's a nice surprise. There might be someone that comes out of that, comes out of there and does that also. And that's not just at wide receiver. That's just about any position on the field as well. That could be an incoming freshman. That could be a guy, a guy who didn't really play that much last year as well, too. It could be a guy coming in like a freshman, like Pat Clax, big 6'2" dude from here. You don't know, and that's the thing. It's kind of like there are all these little surprises that come in as well, too. And that's kind of one of the things Peter Lembo is excited about, is he's kind of mining through this program and figuring out who goes here, who goes where.
In the spring, did it seem like they were doing a good job of spraying the ball around, or were they just targeting like 1 or 2 guys? Or
yeah, they were more targeting 1 or 2 players, and a lot of throws were either short or 1 on target. And you're thinking, who's gonna, who took the time? The question I talked about was, did someone or anyone take the time away to develop chemistry and timing and synchronicity with these receivers? That's a tough thing to do. And, again, more questions than answers about the quarterback position. And as we know, the wide receivers, a lot of their success hinges on how well the quarterback's proficiency.
Absolutely. Yeah.
From what you've seen and heard in this new offense, how do you envision the tight end being used?
Oh, that's a good question, because tight ends were almost overused last year. And, I think there's got to be more balance in the run, in between not just the receivers, but between the run and the pass game as well, too. I really think that's one thing that they have got to do. I love a guy like Andrew Snackenberg, the big snack, as I call him, because you could put him in on those, short yardage situations where you need a long body on a fade pass or something something. I remember I think it was a Kent State. He had a beautiful, beautiful catch that just really evolved out of that. There was such a nice use of the tight end as well, too. And, he's almost underutilized at times as well. To another guy who they kind of turned to was Jake Orlando, another guy from Buffalo, from Williamsville North, but he got hurt. So, he was supposed to be a graduate transfer. He gets an extra year of eligibility. They'll find a way to incorporate him. He's another guy, big, tall, rangy dude as well. Zion Carter was a little more last year. He was a fifth-year senior, the son of Kevin Carter, the former NFL player. A little more of a blocking guy, but times very good situational guy. But since we have to see what kind of offense that Dave Patnode and Pete Lembo are going to use, we got to see where are the tight ends going to fit in.
Moving over to the offensive line, you lose your left tackle to graduation. Center Isaiah Wright transfers to Maryland. But other than that, they seem to fare pretty well in terms of returning production, returning left guard Trevor Brock, right guard Tyler Doty, and right tackle Kalen Shepard. How did the offensive line look in the spring?
They look good. They look solid. Don Polizzi, their center, coming back from an ankle injury last year, so he was hobbled through part of the year, and that didn't help the situation and the synergy on the line as well. But Tyler Doty, this is going to be his. I have lost count of him. I remember covering him when he was in high school, my first year here at St. Joe's. 2021, 22. This is going to be his fourth or fifth year. I've lost track. That's how long I've been covering this program. I'm now losing track of players and their eligibility years, but he's really going to be the anchor of this line as well, too. That's and that's one thing, a lot of people are going to be leaning on him to do that as well. Both the offensive line and the defensive line, I have no questions about it, but especially with some of the transfers that they're bringing in as well, too. I think they're, one of the problem areas on the line, particularly on the defensive line, was at end, you lose Max Michel. CJ Bazzilli is hurt through most of spring practices as well. And, Max Michel was a huge loss. But I think on the defensive line, they've got George Wallow coming back. You lose Damon Williams as well, another big name. But, they're one thing that Maurice Linguist did a very good job at as coach and that his defensive staff did. They built a lot of depth on the defensive line, particularly in the middle. And they brought in, a couple defensive end. They brought in Billy O'Byrne from Ball State. If he didn't play last year, they brought in Antonio Colclo from, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, from Monmouth as well, too. And those are guys with experience just to build some of that depth up. They've got a couple freshmen and sophomores coming in also. That is one thing they really want to do, is just build that depth and get those guys those reps so that they're kind of looking for the long term, if these guys stay around with the transfer portal.
Who do you see starting at left tackle on that offensive line? I know they brought in Gabriel Area from Virginia Tech. Do you think he fits into that, or?
That's the X factor there as well, too. That's one where I'm gonna I look at it and say, wow, what are they could convert somebody as well, too. That's another thing that is not off the table. Someone could change positions as well. Isaiah Wright was one of those versatile guys who could move around as well. He was at center at one point in the season as well. So you gotta see, are they gonna convert someone into a tackle? Are they gonna move someone from the defensive line to the offensive line? That's another question that needs to be answered.
So it seems like there's a lot of room for opportunity to have a breakout season in this offense, in this young offense. If you had to pick somebody to have that breakout type season in 2024, who are you picking?
Nick McMillan. Definitely Nick McMillan. Oh, and whoever is the quarterback, whoever that could be.
So we started talking a little bit about the defensive side of the ball, but they have a new defensive coordinator in Joe Bowen. He comes over from Miami, Ohio, where he was the linebackers coach and the running game coordinator. What did they share? What kind of defensive scheme they're going to play here in 2024?
I think they're going to continue with the 4-2-5. Okay. They had kind of gone with that scheme during the spring game. They had Jaden Lewis playing more at the nickelback as opposed to just the traditional linebacker as well. So and he did really well. He had 2 interceptions. Another local Buffalo kid from Bennett High School here in town. Bennett's state powerhouse in football here as well, too. So they're probably going to go with that. They got a big boost linebacker, though, with Sean Dolak returning another unique case. I'm naming all these local Buffalo kids. Sean Dolak he's from the Buffalo area. He was actually the Buffalo News Player of the Year in football in 2018. He had gotten hurt last year. It was against Louisiana. Limited to 4 games, and he was the nation's leading solo tackler in 2022. And he entered the transfer portal after the season. I thought he was going to go to Syracuse. I thought with NIL opportunities, it being 2.5 hours away from home, new coaching staff, but he went to Utah State. And he was at the spring game for UB. I didn't think anything of it. I said he's probably home after the semester's over, whatever. And like a week later, he's announcing he's transferring back to UB. So that is a huge boost for a linebacking group that was very, very thin. They lost Joe Andreessen, graduate transfer from Bryant, who is now with the Bills, signed as an undrafted free agent out of a rookie invite. And they've got Red Murdoch coming back as well, who he really offset Joe Andreessen really, really well. Really learned a lot from Sean Dolak as well. And I'm really eager to see how that scheme and how that working relationship between those two, between Sean Dolak and Red Murdoch, really rekindles, for lack of a better word. And I want to see what Red learned having played as a redshirt freshman basically almost the entire season after Sean Dolak got hurt. I'm really eager to see how he puts that into action this year.
Is Sean fully recovered from the injuries that kind of plagued him last season?
Well, he was practicing at spring practice at Utah State, so probably as well. But he was in a walking boot. He had a scooter. It was that serious enough to just sideline him for the rest of the season. So, I would hope so. I mean, I think UB would hope so as well.
So we talked about the defensive line and how deep it is and how you don't really have much of a concern. Did anyone stand out to you?
Oh, on the defensive line?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, George Wallow definitely did. He's actually stood out the last couple of years as well. He's a guy that they plugged him in, at defensive tackle, and I remember watching him 3 years ago and thinking, this guy played in high school last year. This guy is like a couple years out of high school. And it was a seamless integration, for lack of a better term. I have high expectations for him this year as well too. And I have very high expectations for him. I think he really, this is his time to really be a leader on the line. I think even though CJ Bazili missed spring practices, he was a guy who really came in during the season and brought a lot of intensity. He was a very good piece to offset Max Michel, another super intense guy at defensive end. So, I think there's the two that you really got to keep an eye out for, George and CJ.
So moving over to the defensive backfield, that looks like it might be a strength of this 2020-14 team, even though they did lose their second leading tackler and 2023 All-MAC first-teamer Devin Grant to Syracuse. Caleb offered also to the portal, and Demetrius Harris and Amonte Struthers graduated, but they returned guys like Marcus Fuqua, Charles McCartherins, and Clevester Hines III, Solomon Brown, and Jaden Oliver. How did the
Trey. That's how we just call him Trey. I butchered the name too.
How did those guys look in the spring?
They looked strong, especially with Jaden Lewis pulling back and playing the nickel back. You might as well have had a fifth defensive back there as well too. One good thing about Devin Grant, he took pressure off Marcus Fuqua. Devin really was the ball hawk, and it really gave Marcus more of a chance to kind of spread his wings as a tackler to roam the field a little bit more as well too. But Marcus was a third-team All-American safety a couple of years ago too. So again, he is the leader, and it is also a very deep position group. One of the interesting things, Jonathan Russo, whose older brother Greg Russo plays for the Bills, he just committed to UB yesterday. And he's a safety. And I'm looking at their depth charts, looking at the years, and I said, well, God, this group, the only guy that we're going to lose after the season is Marcus Fuqua. So this is one of those years Marcus really has a chance to step up and be a leader and really kind of take control of this group and say, hey, guys, this is where I'm going to set the tone. I'm leaving. I want you guys to do this.
Did in the spring, did anyone step up to assume that role that was vacated by Devin Grant, or to be determined?
That's to be determined. It still is to be determined.
All right. Well, I asked you on the offensive side, so I got to ask you on the defensive side. If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who are you picking?
Sean Dolak. I'm picking him not a breakout season, but a roarback season as well, too. I mean, the expectations were high for him last year. I mean, he was on a pretty solid pace before he got hurt to, not so much repeat what he did, but again, about consistency. I mean, 97 solo tackles is not anything easy thing to do, but to perform, to show up, to bring that same level of intensity. And Joe Anderson did a great job. And so did Red Martin of stepping in when Sean went down. But, I think Sean's going to come back in with an intensity and the attitude of, I'm not finished here. I'm going to help this team, help myself, and help this team.
So I think we already know the answer to this question, but with spring practice now over, which position group or groups do you feel is the most concerning?
Well, other than quarterback, that's a good question. I think it's the wide receivers, because there's, other than Nick McMillan and JJ Jenkins from Columbia, and granted, the Ivy League is not, it's not the MAC. The MAC's a very different league. I think this is where, the wide receivers, I think they've got to play with a certain abandon. They've got to come out and not be hesitant. They've got to be strong when they play out there. They have to be confident when they play out there as well. And I think it's going to be up to one of those three: Taji Johnson, JJ, or Nick, or for Nick to play beyond his years and show like, hey, let's take the reins and, prove what we're about here.
Is they added Jack Shields after the spring, but is there anything else you think they might be looking at position wise to add still through the portal, or you think they're pretty much done?
I think they're pretty much done with adding through the portal. The focus now we're seeing, they're starting to focus on 2025 recruiting. They've got 7 recruits in so far that have openly committed and announced, if you will. So I really think that's the focus as well. And there's also the question of, it's June. Guys are already back on campus for workouts, for off-season training. Spring, preseason practices start. They're scheduled to start July 29th. Do you really want to mess with the chemistry that this new staff and these new players that have come in from the portal and is January early and really freshmen? Do you really want to mess with that chemistry right now? Might not be a good idea. I think they're going to stand pat here.
What would you say is the main strength of this team in 2024?
Ooh, that's a good question. The main strength of this team, I think it's going to be their resiliency. They know, a lot of these guys know what it's like to go through a coaching change, as they did after Lance Leipold left prior to the 2021 season. They know what it's like to go through a 4-8 season, a 3-9 season. They know what it's like to be on the cusp of bowl eligibility, not be able to do it for 2 or 3 games. And then finally, it was in 2022, on the last day of the season, they came back from a 22-0 deficit to get that 6th win and become bowl eligible. This team and a lot of their leaders, guys like George Wallow, Sean Dolak, even Nick McMillan, they've been through a lot. They know what all this is like now. The strength is they can say, look, we can rely on this experience. And instead of us, not necessarily, I don't know about cashing it in the right term, instead of us playing, kind of playing with a lot more questions at the end of the season, they're like, we know what we've gone through and we know what we're capable of.
When it comes to recruitment of new players and retention of existing players, NIL and transfer portal are huge, in today's college football world. What kind of impacts have you seen that have at Buffalo?
You've seen it work both ways. After 2021, their starting quarterback, Kyle Van Treese, transferred to Georgia Southern, led Georgia Southern to beat Nebraska, and Georgia Southern got to play Buffalo in the Camellia Bowl that year. Cole Snyder as well, who was their most proven quarterback, left to go to Eastern Michigan. Devin Grant as well, too. You're really, you're seeing a lot of guys leave. And this is something we're also seeing, not just at Buffalo, but we're seeing at the group of 5 level. Your guys getting opportunities at other schools, not just it's Power 4 now, not just at Power 4 schools, but other schools that can give them playing time. Might be able to give them some NIL opportunities as well. We're also having instances where guys may graduate from programs. They may not be able to get their graduate degree because they want to do something else as well, too. But we've seen that Maurice Linguist was very good at bringing in transfers as well. Sometimes a little too happy about bringing in transfers, so they've had to constantly mold and shape. And one of the things that was very good about when Pete Lembo came in this year, only one player transferred after he came in, who now, or should I say transfer, announced his intention to transfer, and that was Mike Washington, who ultimately went to New Mexico State. And it wasn't until late in spring practices, probably after the spring game. Yeah, it was like the end of late April that you saw 7 guys enter the transfer portal. And two players, I should say, declared for the NFL draft when they had eligibility left. So, it was, and it was a case of also, there were different situations as well, also where there might have been more NIL opportunities. There might have been, I don't know if this new coaching staff is going to work for me as well, too. So a lot of these guys clearly are not going to say why they transferred. But, there's also a little bit of an implicit thing as well, too. But it's worked in both directions for this program traditionally. One of the things Lance Leipold was lucky about, the rules changed, before the rules changed after he left, and he's taking advantage of that at Kansas right now. Good for Lance. That's great. They're doing a great job at Kansas as well, too. But the transfer portal has definitely worked both ways for UB.
It seems more and more that the demands of the head coach are really turning into more of a general manager type role between recruiting, player retention, fundraising, and maybe sometimes less of the X's and O's role. Do you see that happening at Buffalo?
Not yet. But I also say that, and Pete Lembo is 5 months on the job as well, too. Yep. So ask me that question again after the season when Pete has to juggle, a lot. He's got a lot more balls in the air, or a lot more hats he's got to wear.
Well, we hope to have you on next year, and you can come on and talk about it next year.
Yeah. Like I said, let's revisit this in a year.
Yeah.
What does success look like for the Buffalo Bulls in 2024?
Starting quarterback who's consistent, a healthy team as well. A lot of injuries that happened last year as well, too. A lot of communication between everybody on this team. I mean, that is a top-down thing. I mean, Pete Lembo to the coordinators, to the assistant coaches. I mean, down to the quarterbacks on the sideline who are wearing the different colored vests and are flashing signals. Or there's got to be communication from the top down and from the bottom up as well. You've got to win. They've got to be consistent as well, too. I like to joke when I'm covering sports. The first-year coach comes in, I'm like, you got to pass because it's the first year. But Pete Lembo has proven he is a winner. He has proven he is an innovator. He has also proven that he can construct programs, that he can instill ethics and values and standards and accountability as well. So I think all of that together will help Buffalo paint the image of a successful program. And, I would say 6 wins.
Got to get that bowl eligibility. Is there anything else that you want to share or think that we should know about this 2024 Buffalo Bulls football team?
Again, it's a new vibe. You're seeing a lot more players out in the community, a lot more coaches out in the community as well, too. You're seeing again a lot more accountability that's being emphasized as a standard in this program also. So I think Pete Start has boded very well for what can unfold for this program this year.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. We greatly appreciate it.
No, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you are listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.